Joining us now, Omar Samad is Afghanistan's former ambassador to Canada and France. Kurt Volker is the former US ambassador to NATO. And Mohammad Ali is a senior fellow focusing on Afghanistan at the Center for Global Policy. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Ambassador Samad, let me start with you. Afghanistan being discussed by NATO again at this meeting in Brussels. How would you describe the security situation in Afghanistan right now?
I would say shaky. I would say, as the American general had once put it a few weeks ago, in a stalemated situation. What is reality on the ground, obviously, is that the Taliban seem to have more influence and control over territory this year than they had in previous years. At the same time, we also see that the Afghan forces have put up very stiff resistance, that they're better equipped to some extent, but they need more assistance. And I think that this is what is going to come up at the NATO summit in Brussels as to what kind of help, to what extent, whether there will be a timeline or not, because in the past there were timelines, and maybe this time it will have no date affiliated to it.
After 16 years of war, Ambassador, are you surprised that the Taliban has been making gains in Afghanistan?
Well, part of me is surprised, yes, that they are still, an adversary to reckon with. But at the same time, having been involved and having looked at how policy is shaped and how strategy has been defined over the years, I recognize and I do understand that the Taliban have taken advantage of some of the flaws that existed in those policies and strategies. And I think that has given them momentum. They're built upon it. They still very much are taking advantage of sanctuaries that exist outside of Afghanistan. They have a network that supplies them and finances them. And the other side, which includes the Afghan government, the international community as seen under NATO, has not been able to crack down on these networks or to dismantle the support system.
Ambassador Volker, one of the options being looked at by the United States is to send in more troops. As we heard our reporter say, there was one number mentioned, 5,000, more likely 3,000. That's not been enthusiastically received by the Afghan government. Would it be a good idea to send in more troops?
I think it would be a good idea to have a clear goal and then to figure out the strategy of what's needed to achieve that goal. I think right now we're in a situation over the past several years where it was a minimalist level of support aimed at preventing failure, but not achieving long-term stability, not achieving sustainability in Afghanistan. 5,000 troops may be a good number, it may not, but it's certainly not clear to me, and I don't think it's clear to anyone at this point, what exactly that's going to do other than more of the same. I do think we need to have a fresh look at what's the goal, what can we achieve, what's required for that.
And I guess it's also a challenge for the people who make those decisions here in Washington to consider U.S. domestic public opinion.
Absolutely, and it has been a long time, as you pointed out, and I think the public is very skeptical of just an open-ended troop commitment. I agree that it was very bad strategy to announce deadlines for withdrawal. The reason that was done was to try to placate that demand that we don't do this on an open-ended basis. But frankly, it would be a wasted effort, a discredit to all the lives that were lost already, to have put so much into Afghanistan and then just walk away. I do think we need to follow through.
Ali, if the Afghan government is lukewarm to the idea of more troops being sent to the country, what's the alternative?
Well, I think the Afghan government is supportive of the 5,000 troops to Afghanistan, but that's not going to change anything. It may change a lot of things because U.S. have re-announced their support to Afghanistan in such a way where they had done in 2014. That our mission is accomplished, Al-Qaeda has been defeated, Taliban have been defeated, there is nothing left, so we are withdrawing the troops. But that wasn't the case, and Al-Qaeda is still in Afghanistan. ISIS, not only Al-Qaeda, but ISIS have emerged as a threat to the world. After Syria and Iraq, ISIS have built their Khorasan base in Afghanistan, which is a threat. So there was a policy failure a disaster, I would say, under the previous administration that led to the crisis today in Afghanistan. But again, this administration is trying to do, repair the damage done by the previous administration. So the 5,000 troops is going to help the Afghan government, the security forces politically, because Afghans after 2014 were under the assumption that, hey, Americans are leaving, the international troops are leaving, so there is no support for us. So there was the recruitment level went down. There were lots of desertion and attrition in the Afghan army. But this re-announcement of the American support, whether it's 5,000 or 10,000, is kind of going to reassure the Afghans, the international community, and particularly Americans, are in their side.
Ambassador Samad, domestic forces, domestic security forces, Afghan forces, have they failed to live up to expectations?
Yes and no. But let me correct one thing before I continue on this. These 5,000, first of all, we do not have an exact figure. As you said, between 3 and 5, maybe. There's a discussion still going on within the U.S. administration on how to approach this sort of increase in the numbers. And number two, these are not combat troops. These are mostly trainers, advisors, and those who assist the Afghan forces. There might be an increase still.
NATO doesn't have a combat mission.
Exactly. So this is not a combat mission. That combat mission ended in 2014. So I want everybody to be clear that it is mostly to help and advise and assist the Afghan army and the nascent air force that is in existence. Getting back to your question, Afghan forces have done the best they can under the circumstances, in my opinion. I think that they have been under tremendous pressure from within and also from the pressures that exist politically in the political environment in Afghanistan. Sometimes you have some political leaders in Afghanistan who come and say, make a statement that is not very conducive to encouraging the forces and giving them some support, moral support. We saw this with former President Karzai, who every time that a bomb is dropped on the enemy, is making a case that this is bad for Afghanistan. Whereas we know that the majority of the Afghan population and the Afghan government think that if that target is an enemy target, that it is acceptable to hit it. So they have had problems, but at the same time, the future of the international commitment to Afghanistan on the security front has to be very focused. It has to take into account lessons learned. It has to take into account best practices that show that the Afghan forces are able. And the one very positive aspect of the Afghan security development are the special forces. I think what you're going to see is a willingness on the part of NATO and the United States to maybe even double the number of Afghan special forces who have been very effective in trying to nail down the Taliban and other groups who are affiliated with the Taliban.
And Ambassador Volker, one of the reasons the United States gave, the White House gave, in talking about sending more troops to Afghanistan is to force the Taliban to the negotiating table. Is that in some way a tacit admission that the military campaign has not worked, it in fact has failed, we're going to have to negotiate our way out of this?
I wouldn't quite see it that way. I think it's wishful thinking, first off, that you're going to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table. They think they're winning, and they think that they can continue. So they are not just likely to come to a table and say, okay, now let's support the Afghan government. Not going to happen. The second thing is that we haven't been, as the ambassador just said, we've not been in a combat role. We haven't been fighting and winning in Afghanistan for several years. And we've been providing the minimal support necessary to the Afghan forces to prevent failure. What I think the administration is recognizing is that is not sufficient, but it has not taken the further step of defining what would be and how do we achieve that. I think that is yet to come. This additional measure, whether it's 3,000 or 5,000, is just an improvement of the current situation, not a change of that situation.